IC Books channel.
All right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive. This time we're going to be looking at something a little different.
Oh,
and we'll be
man.
kind of stepping outside of our usual format to look at a guide that we came across
Yeah.
that gives some really practical and I thought kind of interesting tips for how to boost your English skills.
Oh, cool.
But the catch is that it's not like your typical,
Right.
study harder kind of advice.
Yeah.
This is more about looking at ways that you can just kind of weave English into your everyday life, almost like it's a background
Okay.
app that's running all the time.
Yeah. I like that analogy.
So yeah, I thought this would be a cool little deep dive to see what we could pull out of this.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And maybe, give our listeners some ideas that they could actually put into practice.
Yeah, because sometimes you get so bogged down with like the traditional methods that you forget that there are other ways to kind of absorb the language.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that this guide really emphasizes.
Yeah.
Is that it's not necessarily about like sitting down with a textbook and, drilling yourself on grammar rules.
Yeah.
It's more about just making English like an integral part of your day-to-day experience. And it starts off by talking about media immersion.
Okay.
And, we all consume media, right?
Yeah.
I mean, whether it's watching movies or TV shows or listening to music.
Yeah.
But this is kind of giving us some tips on how to make that work for us in terms of learning English.
Right. So instead of just passively watching something, actually kind of think about what you can gain from it.
Exactly. So what are some of the ways that they suggest to kind of...
Well, one of the most basic things, and I know it sounds simple, but even just like having English language media playing in the background can actually help your brain absorb the sounds, the rhythms, the patterns of the language, even if you're not consciously paying attention to it. It's like, learning a song without even realizing it.
Like osmosis.
Exactly, exactly.
Interesting.
And then you can kind of build on that by, maybe starting with subtitles on.
Right.
And then as you get more comfortable, you can gradually wean yourself off of them.
I like that weaning yourself off because I know I've definitely done that with certain languages where I'll start with subtitles and then at some point I realize like I'm not even reading them anymore.
Exactly.
So that's a really good tip.
And then another thing that I found really helpful was podcasts and audiobooks.
Oh, yeah.
Because you can kind of choose something that's specifically tailored to your interests. And it's a great way to get exposed to different accents, different vocabulary. You could listen to a podcast from Australia one day and then one from the UK the next.
That's a really good point because I think sometimes we can get kind of stuck in our own little bubble of, whatever our preferred accent is. But it's so important to branch out and be able to understand different ways of speaking.
It's like anything, the more you expose yourself to different variations of the language, the more well-rounded your comprehension becomes.
Yeah.
It's like I was really into this British true crime podcast for a while and started picking up all these like British slang terms that I never would have encountered otherwise.
Like what was one?
Oh, gosh. Let me think. I remember one time they were talking about a suspect who had been nicked by the bobbies.
Nicked by the bobbies.
I had to look that one up.
Yeah.
It means arrested by the police.
Oh, that's so funny.
You know, right? And now I use it all the time.
That's great.
I love picking up those little idiosyncrasies.
Yeah, well, and it makes you sound cool too, right? Like you really know what you're talking about.
I'm trying to blend in,
Yeah, exactly.
But it's funny you should mention that because I had a similar experience with a British sitcom I was obsessed with years ago.
Okay.
And to this day, I still find myself saying things like, Bob's your uncle, without even thinking about it.
Wow. So it really does stick with you, even if you're not consciously trying to learn it.
It really does. And that kind of leads into another point that the guide makes, which is about the importance of speaking practice.
Okay.
And I know that can be a little intimidating for some people.
Yeah, for sure.
But they actually had this kind of unusual suggestion.
What's that?
They said, talk to yourself.
Talk to yourself.
Yeah, English.
I mean, I guess it makes sense.
Right.
But it also sounds a little crazy.
I know it sounds a little out there. But if you think about it, it's actually kind of similar to what athletes do when they use visualization.
How so?
Well, they mentally rehearse their moves over and over again in their minds.
Right.
And that helps them to perform better in real life.
So you're saying talking to yourself is like mental rehearsal for your English.
You're practicing forming sentences, getting more comfortable expressing your thoughts out loud.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And the best part is no one has to know you're doing it. You can just be walking around your house talking to yourself.
That's right. No judgment.
No judgment at all.
So give us some examples. Like what are some ways that people can actually incorporate this into their day?
Well, one simple thing is to just narrate what you're doing as you go about your day.
Okay.
So if you're cooking, for example, you could say things like, okay, now I'm chopping the vegetables. I'm adding the spices. I'm setting the timer. Just kind of describe the actions that you're taking.
That's good.
And you can even have like imaginary conversations in English.
Oh, that's fun.
Right. So you could pretend you're ordering food at a restaurant, or you're asking for directions, or you're having a discussion with a colleague.
I mean, it sounds a little silly, but I can see how it would be helpful.
Right, because you're getting that practice of actually forming those sentences and getting those words out of your mouth.
And it's kind of like you have a built-in conversation partner that's always available.
24/7? Yeah. So, if you're not quite ready to like sign up for a language exchange, or you're feeling a little shy talking to yourself, is a great way to just kind of...
That's a good stepping stone.
Yeah.
So that's a good one. I like that.
Now, of course, if you do want to interact with real humans, which I highly recommend, language exchange partners or apps can be fantastic for real-time practice.
For sure, because then you get that feedback, you to hear how other people are speaking.
Exactly, and you can kind of learn from their mistakes as well.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And it's just more fun, to have a real conversation with someone.
Right, it's more engaging.
It is, yeah.
So we've talked about media immersion, we've talked about speaking practice. What else does this guide kind of dive into?
Well, one thing that really resonated with me was the idea of integrating English into your daily tasks, like those small, everyday things that you do that you might not even think about.
Give me some examples.
Well, for example, the guide suggests things like reading recipes in English, labeling household items, put a little sticky note on your fridge that says refrigerator.
Oh. I like that.
Right, even just writing your to-do list or journaling in English.
Yeah, and I guess the idea there is that it's not this big overwhelming thing. It's just these little tiny moments throughout the day where you're exposing yourself to the language.
Right, and it's all about consistency. Those small actions done repeatedly over time, they really do have a compounding effect.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's like, how the guide suggests learning one new word each day?
Right.
You might not see a huge difference right away, but those words, they start to add up. And the repetition helps to cement them in your memory.
You're totally right. It's like building any skill, the more you use it, the stronger it becomes.
Exactly. And it becomes more natural, more automatic. You don't have to think about it so much.
Okay. So we've talked about kind of that passive exposure and then the speaking practice, which is more active. But then the guide also talks about active engagement and using technology to your advantage. And this is where I think things get really interesting.
Absolutely, because, we've talked about passive learning, but active participation, that's really where the magic happens.
So what are some of the suggestions?
Well, think about joining online communities or conversation groups that are focused on topics you're interested in. It's like immersing yourself in a native English-speaking environment, even if you're just at home in your pajamas.
Yeah, that's a great way to kind of get that real-world experience without actually having to travel.
Exactly. And there are so many different options out there, whether you're into gaming or cooking or, whatever your hobbies are.
Right.
You can find a community of people who speak English.
Okay, good.
And then, of course, there are language learning apps,
which
can be helpful. But the key is to not get stuck in what the guide calls the app trap.
The app trap? What's that?
Well, it's easy to spend all your time, memorizing vocabulary lists and doing exercises on the app, but then you never actually use the language in real life.
Oh, I've totally been there.
Yeah.
Like I'll do all the lessons and I'll feel really good about myself, but then when I actually try to have a conversation, I'm like completely blanking.
It's like the words are stuck in your head.
Yeah.
They're not coming out.
Exactly.
So it's important to take what you learn on the app and actually apply it in real-world situations.
So how do you do that?
Well, one thing you can do is try to incorporate those new words and phrases into your conversations.
Okay.
Even if it feels a little awkward at first. Just try to use them. And the more you use them, the more natural they'll become.
So it's about taking that knowledge and actually putting it into practice.
Oh, exactly.
I actually did something kind of interesting recently.
What's that?
I switched my phone settings to English.
Oh, wow.
Just to kind of like shake things up
and
see what would happen. And it's amazing how many like tech-related words I've learned just from navigating my phone.
That's brilliant.
Right.
It's like immersive learning without even trying.
Exactly.
And it's those little things that can make a big difference over time.
Yeah, because you're not even really thinking about it as learning. You're just using your phone.
Right, exactly.
That's a good one.
And speaking of kind of like those unexpected ways to learn,
yeah,
the guide also talks about the power of reading aloud.
Reading aloud.
And mindful listening. And it's not just about understanding the words.
Right.
It's about paying attention to the pronunciation, the intonation, even the emotions behind the language.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's like really immersing yourself in the sound of the language.
So it's not just about comprehension.
Yeah.
It's also about like how you deliver the language.
Exactly, because the way you say something can completely change its meaning.
Right.
So paying attention to those subtle nuances can really help you to understand and to speak English more effectively.
I've tried reading aloud before, and I always feel a little bit silly, like I'm back in elementary school.
I know what you mean.
But I do remember having to slow down and pronounce each word carefully.
Right, and that's actually a good thing.
Okay.
Because it forces you to pay attention to each sound, which can really help to improve your pronunciation and your fluency.
So it's like training your mouth to make the right sounds.
Exactly. And plus, you're engaging multiple senses. You're
Right.
seeing the words, you're hearing them, and you're even feeling the way your mouth moves as you speak.
That's a good point.
It's a much more active way to engage with the language.
Okay, so reading aloud, mindful listening, those are good tips. Now, we've talked about a lot of different techniques. What about setting ourselves up for success? Like, what are some things that we can do to make sure that we're actually putting these into practice and staying motivated?
Well, the guide really stresses the importance of setting small, achievable goals.
Okay.
It's easy to get overwhelmed if you try to do too much at once.
Right, like I'm going to become fluent in a week. Exactly.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
So instead of trying to become fluent overnight, how about dedicating just 1 hour each day
Okay.
to engaging with English in some way?
That's manageable.
Right. It could be watching a show, listening to a podcast, reading a news article, even just talking to yourself in English for a few minutes.
So it's not about the quantity, it's about the consistency.
Exactly.
And that's good.
And it's about finding ways to make it enjoyable so
Right.
that you're more likely to stick with it.
That's a really good point, because if you're not enjoying it, you're not going to want to do it.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's our deep dive into this guide on boosting your English skills. And I think the main takeaway here is that it's not about finding the perfect method or, the one magic solution. It's about finding what works for you and making English a part of your life.
Exactly. And remember, those small steps taken consistently, they really do add up to big results.
So as a final thought for our listeners, what's one thing that they can do today? That's a good question, I would say. Choose one thing from this episode that resonated with you.
Okay.
And make a commitment to try it today. It could be switching your phone settings to English. It could be listening to an English podcast during your commute. It could even be spending just 5 minutes reading aloud from a book or an article. The important thing is to take action and to start building those habits.
That's great advice. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See you later.